I'm a filmmaker now, but I've done quite a lot of creative jobs in the past. I actually originally come from Australia, and part of the reason I wanted to do this talk was I went into the kind of creative fields. Probably it wasn't the natural path for me when I was there, and actually the idea of the gut and gut instinct in creative work was something that I probably had to learn more than others potentially, and it's something that's become really a sort of a focal point of my thinking in the last couple of years, particularly in relation to the documentary that I made last year, and it was quite interesting that documentary really brought out that feeling of a gut process as a maker. So this talk's called the Anatomy of the Gut, an exploration on how to find it, when to trust it, and what to do when it stops working. I'm sure it's quite cliche, really, to talk about the gut. Everyone knows, trust your gut. will.i.am said it on The Voice the other week, I trust my gut, no one else watches The Voice but me, I'm sure. But, you know, this idea of the gut it's quite an obvious thing, but it's something that the older I get in this industry, the more I rely on it. There's been times when, in different parts of my job, I worked in advertising quite a lot, where that gut feeling became stifled, or I found it hard to trust my gut. And so it was kind of important to talk about it, I guess, in relation to the documentary, but also maybe you guys are designers or typographers, other things. I still think it relates to all of those. So to start with, it's not this gut, it is our creative instinct. And really, as I was saying, the idea of stop making sense. I came from a very, very kind of maths, science, logical background, teaching, engineering, parents, and really that gut instinct wasn't something that I was brought up with. So when I came to London and studied at St Martin's, it sort of came to life. And I studied at St Martin's, like probably loads of people here, in design. I then went on and I worked at Mother. I don't know if you know Mother, the advertising agency, and I worked there for a long time, like 8 to 10 years. And I worked there, started as a designer, moved into art direction and creative direction, and really got very immersed in that world. And it was a great place to work, amazing place to work, because there's so many different things that you do there. We made TV commercials, design stuff, events, we do all kinds of things. But in advertising itself, I guess I found, in that environment, I kind of found that my gut didn't work as hard as maybe it does now. And that was maybe because I was working with a lot of people, and also the nature of advertising. It's quite hard, actually, to get your gut to work when you're pleasing people and clients all the time. So what I then did is I moved into directing, and I started my first directing project probably 5 years ago. And actually, as a director, that's when I found that my gut is most important, and it's really, all the experience I've had now actually comes down to those feelings. Of course, I need that knowledge, but actually, when I'm on set, this job, out of all the jobs I've had in the creative kind of industries, has been the most intuitive, I guess, and the one that relies on my instinct. So last year, I did this documentary called Beat 2012, and I'd never made a documentary before. I'm one of those stupid people that once I've done one thing, I try something else. That's why I've had all these different jobs in this industry. So I thought, I got sent this project, and it was with Mark Ronson, to follow him around the world while he made a track for the Olympics. And whether you like the track or not, I'm not even sure I do myself, but the documentary itself was a fascinating project. It was with Olympic athletes, and he was making a song using their sounds. So an archer, when he kind of released an arrow, hit the board, he'd use that as a kick drum. So somehow I ended up with this project on my desk, and for some stupid reason I thought, yeah, I haven't made a documentary, I haven't done anything over 3 minutes, but God, I'm just going to do it, you know? And there was something in my gut that said I could do it, and I guess that's the first place I use my gut, is just knowing whether I'm capable of something, you know, whether I've done it before or not, you know? When a project lands on the desk, I always have quite an instant reaction, you know, can I do that, can I not? Is it something I want to learn to do as well? And so this kind of brought me to this idea of, you know, being a director, and when I'm on set, and when I was on set with a documentary, is you feel very exposed, you know, maybe more so than any other job I've had, you know. When I was designing, I could hide behind my Mac, or Even in advertising, there was layers of clients and I could find my way through. But as a director, you have to stand on set and tell people what to do. And in that very moment, you have to know what you feel. And you have to be very, very aware of what you feel and how to act on that. And as I said, that documentary experience was so raw and so in the moment that I had nothing else really in much of it but to rely on my instincts. So my gut. My husband told me this looked more like a heart than a gut, and I'm not an illustrator, that's one job I'm not. But I wanted just to explain sort of how my gut works. And I really believe there's different bits of it. I think the first bit for me is the fear gland, or there's something with fear that activates in my gut. And that's a good sign. You know, the fear is fear, but I always think if I'm a little bit scared, I'm doing something new. Again, you all probably know that, but it's really important that I feel that when I start a project. I then generally get quite excited. I'm overexcited, I come up with loads of ideas, get rolling with it. And this kind of really starts to kick in the adrenaline. So when my gut's really working, and I know it is, those things are in place. But I usually sort of go off on a bit of a tangent at that point, and there's then a healthy amount of dread that sort of drops in. And at that point I think, oh God, did I really agree to do this job? Like, why have I taken this on? You know, with all the excitement and all my ideas, I actually now have to pull this thing off. And I generally think that's good as well. So if I have that healthy balance of fear, excitement, adrenaline, and dread, then I know I'm generally going in the right direction. Without one of those things, like without the dread or without the fear, then maybe it's not something I should do. The other thing with my personal gut and how I work with it is it moves around. So sometimes I feel that it's here, a bit like a third eye, it sits in front of my head. And I can feel somewhere in here that I should do something. Other times it's more here in my throat, physically. You know, it might be that sometimes it's my negative gut reaction that's in my throat. When I shouldn't do something or I don't want to do something, that's where I feel it. And then other times, and this is generally when I'm making something, I feel my gut is more around me. It's more sort of, I guess, like a force field, you know? And it's between me and whoever I'm directing. And I have to trust that space around me. So I'll sort of bring that back to the making process. I know this talks about the making, and I could have spoken about, I guess, cinematography or the craft of directing, but I felt that this really united the process of directing because there are so many elements, you know, from casting people and finding the right face. And it's really a decision-making job, a director. You have to decide your crew, the people that are there, how you're going to make it look. And it is really a series of decisions that I try my hardest to make on instinct. So last year when I was working on the documentary, and as I said, I'd never done anything like it before. I'd never done an interview with anyone. It's not a world that I'd explored at all. And I sat down with a documentary maker, a friend's father who was very experienced, and he gave me this one piece of advice, which was, you can't go back. And I held that with me the entire time. This idea that you can't go back and do something again, particularly on a documentary. I think it applies to design and all things, but if you feel that even though everyone else might be done, that you haven't quite got a shot, or you know, this is the last shot of the day and you turn around and you see another image that you want to shoot. So often everyone wants to pack up and go, and I realized that with this piece of advice, I just had to keep shooting. Anytime I thought of something and anytime I saw something, I had to trust that feeling and my gut of, I can't go back, I must get this now. And I do think that applies to design work, or I look back on some jobs I've done and, you know, I've done some great work in the past, and like anyone, I guess some stuff that I'd prefer I never done. And I think that the stuff that I don't like now that I've made is the stuff where I didn't go that extra mile, or I didn't trust my gut. In things, and so I now really try at all times to sort of have quite a level approach so that I don't make work that I don't like. Another bit of advice that I got from Jonathan Glazer, who I'm sure you all know, he sort of said at Throwaway one day, and it was another piece of kind of information that I hold with me all the time, which is this idea of don't make the work before you make the work. And in filmmaking in particular, that's hugely important because there's so many processes, particularly when you direct a commercial. Storyboarding, pre-visualization, the client basically wants, even today, I haven't even got a job and I'm doing my fourth round of boards to show the client what this thing's going to look like. And everybody wants to see the job these days before it's made. And John, I went to him on a job and I said, this is my idea, I don't know how to make it. And, I was strategizing on everything and he said, don't make the work before you make the work. Just go, be in the moment and make it. And if I'm struggling on something, I always remember that, is that it's about, and particularly filmmaking, it's very much about that moment, the moment you're on set, the moment you feel something. And actually, all the prep in the world, I love prep, by the way, prep makes you have those moments. But for all the prep in the world, something very different might happen, and that might be where the magic comes from. So that's kind of the basic outline to the positives about the gut. But I do find like it's not always as easy. Although I know I should trust my gut, it's not always the easiest thing to do. So I do find that sometimes you lose your gut. And I started to think about this as I was writing the talk. I thought, last year, again, on the documentary, there was several situations where I can look back now and reflect and think, ooh, I let something happen there that made the work worse, that didn't make sense actually, but I went with it. And I tried to break these down, and the first one is death by awe. For me, when I'm in awe of somebody, or I think someone is better than me, sometimes I'll silence my own gut. So particularly as a director, and sometimes as a female director, you get kind of really tough, brilliant men on set who, maybe think that they know much better than you. And often, and maybe more so in my early directing career, I would trust their opinion maybe, or their gut instincts more than I would my own. This happened actually on a recent job, and I had a crane operator from big Hollywood movies, and he was amazing. And he was like, he'd talk in this way with his hands, and he just he made me sort of go into a trance on how he would move this crane around. And I was so in awe of the guy that I sort of let him roll with it. And even when my instincts would tell me, not sure about that, I sort of let him roll. And I let him roll to the point where I ended up in the edit of that job, and I really hadn't got the shots I needed. And my editor said to me, like, why haven't you even got just like a basic wide? And I was like, I sort of let this guy roll. And I don't think I'll ever do that again now. I think I need to, as a director, you need to keep yourself in check, and no matter how good the people are around you, it's great to have great people around you. They make you look better. But as long as they are servicing your vision, and as long as they're all making that their priority rather than finding their own vision through that. The next way I personally lose my gut is death by fury. If I get angry, if something happens on set, if something doesn't turn up, I've had a lot of disasters on set. Once when an artist, Wiley, wouldn't get out of his van because he wanted fried chicken, until he would do it. Even with the fried chicken, he still wouldn't get out of the van, and I had to shoot cutaways for the whole video, and he didn't turn up. I mean, there's all manner of disasters that one has, and I now know that that's part of filmmaking. And if I get angry, then I lose my gut. Absolutely, it just goes, and I can't feel the work. And so one of my biggest lessons on set as a director is to be calm. And I'm not all the time, definitely not, but I'd really know, and I try to train myself that no matter what's going down, actually to direct well, you have to be relaxed. And for your gut to actually work for you, you have to just let these things happen and find your way through them. And then this is my most frustrating reason that my gut doesn't work, and it's death by 1,000 opinions. And I don't know if anyone works in advertising here at the moment, or maybe in the design world it's the same, but there is this feeling at the moment in particular, and I wish I was a director back in Jonathan Glazer's day, where they got plenty of money and enough control, and they went off and they made stuff. Now there's so many layers of opinion, I find, when you're working. I try and find small teams in an agency. I try and find single people or individuals or small teams that I can work with rather than big teams, because the more opinions, sometimes you lose faith in your own gut. You know, no matter how strongly you feel about something, if there's a consensus with the rest of the team, and that may be the client, the agency, the client, their boss's boss, it's very hard to keep that feeling. And sometimes even when you've got that feeling, they disagree with it. So that's my pet hate at the moment. And actually I saw this quote the other day by David Ogilvy, which I think was probably written even 10, 15 years ago, but much of the messy advertising you see on television today is a product of committees. Committees can criticize advertisements, but they should never be allowed to create them. And I sort of agree on that. I had a script recently that I wrote for it's like a short film for a brand, and everyone loved it. Everyone was like, we love this is great. I haven't made it yet, it's still in the process. This is amazing, and it had so many layers of client, and each layer found one scene that they didn't like. And each client had another one. Oh, we love it, but I don't like this scene. I love it, I don't like this scene. So I went through the whole script, and if I took out every part that they didn't want, there's no film at all. There was no scenes left. And it was that idea that, a camel is a horse designed by committee. It's just that idea that, how do you, with the pressures of the business of the creative industries, how do you keep that focus on the gut? I've got 1 minute to go, I've noticed, in my 18 minutes, and I'm just going to figure out what I will fly through a couple of things. As a director, the other thing that's quite important is choosing to do work and choosing not to do work. And this is just a friend talking to me, he's a designer. He said, I was struggling whether to do a job, and he said, have you ever regretted saying no? And in truth, as a director working in music videos, commercials, any of these fields, actually the most powerful thing you have now is the power to say no. I don't want to do that project, because every project, doesn't matter what the budget, I find is as draining and busy as the one before. So I try and keep that to heart. And again, Jonathan Glazer used to say, what you say no to says as much, if not more, than saying yes. And so I use my gut in that as well. That's one of my most tumultuous times with my gut, is whether I say yes or no to a job. And then very briefly, when I was preparing this talk, I started to chat to my mates about their guts, because I thought, this is me, this is how I feel, but how do other creative people feel? Is it just me being overly sensitive about how my relationship to my creative instincts? And it always started a conversation, and I got my friends who are in the industry to just draw where their gut was physically, where they felt it. And so here's just a few, I'll flick through them. This was Seb Edwards, who's a director at Academy, and his gut was here. And it was quite interesting, because his work is very intellectual, actually. And it was very interesting that his gut was less down here and more in his head. This is a storyboard artist friend of mine. He felt like it was actually sitting next to his heart behind his chest, and actually, when it was working, would really burn through and he'd really feel it. And in fact, that was quite a common position, for many of my mates. This is Augusto, who's a creative director. And he felt it was in here as well. My flame artist I work with, he felt it was more in the back of his, between his two shoulder blades, and it was more of a tingly feeling. This one was one of my favorites. It's a creative friend of mine who works at Mother New York, and his was a combination of his balls, and specifically his left nutsack, excuse my language, and the back of his head. And that moment where his balls and his brain collide was where he felt his gut was most powerful. Another creative at work club, Joe, his was more related to time. He said that he didn't know where his gut was, but he knew that his instincts got moving when there was a deadline. And I think a lot of us have that. My crazy friend Jamie thought it was in the stuffed crust of a pizza. There was loads, and it was really interesting to really see where they were. This was Corin Hardy, a director, and he did me a little storyboard on it. And for him, it was like a spidey sense, and he knew that it would eventually that the gut would speak and speak the truth when it was working. And it was so fascinating, because no one just sent me a little sketch. Everyone sent me like a couple of paragraphs about how they felt about their gut. This was Caroline, my old creative partner. She felt that it works somewhere between her belly and her throat, and actually gets tighter and tighter as she goes up until she can't do anything but act on it. I quite like this one as well. This was Lexi. He's a designer at Burgess Design, and his gut and brain have to be aligned. He can't do one without the other. Bob, a director at Some Such, he felt swallowed by his gut most of the time, but he felt like he would needed to be in amongst it. Ben Mooj at Work Club, he felt that his was in the middle of the night. This was about having one eye open at 2:53 in the morning, and that's when he knew his gut instincts were working, is when he was waking up and thinking about it. And the rest, they sort of make sense and stuff. But what I found fascinating by just the very nature of doing that was, and Simon, I think he's talking tonight, his gut was quite bizarre. But what I thought was really interesting, that everybody used it and everyone felt it. And out of everyone I emailed to send me something, pretty much everyone sent something back, which meant that no matter what they were, directors, designers, it was something very close to the making process, and something that, you know, they held very closely as they made work. And that's it. I'm 3 minutes over. I apologise. Thank you for listening, guys, and I hope that was vaguely insightful to my process. Cheers.